My name is Mel. I make content for Seal's YouTube and TikTok, and today I'm interviewing 5 Cent Sound.
Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Onembo. I use the she series of pronouns and I am the editor-in-chief of 5 Cent Sound.
Hi, I am the editorial manager for 5 Cent Sound, and my name is Joy, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns.
Hi, my name is Nick Gemma. I use the he series pronouns, and I am the online director for 5 Cent Sound.
Welcome. So our first topic is going to be 5 Cent Sound on campus, just how your org functions. So what is the process for new members to join and to write for the magazine?
I can start us off with that question. The process is really chill. We have a hiring process both at the beginning of the fall semester and also the beginning of the spring semester. We're currently running a summer staff as well. And the nice thing about our summer staff is it's kind of just on everyone's own basis. So people can either pitch articles, visual content, playlists, anything at their own kind of availability. So it's very nice because it gives writers a lot of experience and just the opportunity to try new things. And the nice thing about us too is that we don't require any type of prior experience or knowledge within the music industry. We're really just marketed and a place for music lovers to all connect and get experience within the field. And some of the positions we kind of hire for are writers, visual artists, photographers, especially now that things are loosening with COVID, illustrators, designers, and playlist curators.
Cool. And who decides what articles will be put in each issue?
So for the past few times that I've been on the magazine, for the past few issues, we've started doing, especially with COVID too, we've had Zoom workshop pitch meetings, which essentially anyone who has applied is welcome to come on and pitch their article ideas. And then after, while we're on the call, we'll workshop them with the people who are pitching and kind of offer suggestions and comments within the moment. And then a few days after that initial meeting, our editors and executive board will meet up separately and go through all of those pitches and decide which ones will be put into print and which ones will be going online. And in the past as well, we've kind of done guiding themes for our magazine. So we've had certain concepts that have either guided or shaped the visual and pitch aspects, but at the same time, just because a pitch is centered around that type of content doesn't guarantee or mean that that would be automatically accepted. We kind of just go with what sounds best in the moment and what everyone agrees on.
Sort of along that same line, articles, if we feel they don't fit the sort of vibe of an issue, but they are good pitches and we want to focus on that, even if it's just sort of off script for a second. We always like to feature, and we use the blog to both give earlier writers and freshman writers more opportunities to write about sort of whatever they want, but just to highlight whatever content is in right now, or whatever content someone wants to write about, so long as your pitch is a good idea and we feel you can write about it. We love to feature pretty much everything.
And to follow up on that, does each magazine have its own theme, and how do you guys decide that theme?
This is something new we've kind of been working with because before I had joined, there hadn't really been a lot of themes that I know of. But the fall semester this past year, we did kind of a guided theme with that, and it really looked like, I loved it because it looked and resembled like a middle school notebook, and it had a lot of, we were trying to reach into topics that weren't really talked about in the music industry. So there was a lot of more I guess taboo is the right word for it, but it was really nice to kind of experiment and give our writers the chance to delve into things that aren't necessarily talked about a lot. And I think that I really like the concept of themes as well, because it gives inspiration and it helps people kind of get an idea with pitches and get comfortable. But at the same time, it's mostly just for the visual aesthetic and having some type of connecting factor within the article. We haven't really talked about what we're going to be doing in the fall of this year, but I definitely like the idea, and depending on what our exec members and editors say, if they're with it, then I'm sure we can come up with something awesome.
Yeah, I think especially for younger kids coming in, it's much easier to have something to narrow down what you're trying to say. And there are a lot of people who will come into pitch meetings and be a little frazzled and not necessarily know how to express themselves or share what they want to do. And then it's easier for us to like work whatever they want to talk about into a bigger theme instead of kind of going off of what's trending, because that's everywhere. We don't always want to talk about that. We want unique things.
And also kind of building off of what Joy just said, I really like the idea of having that concept because, like I said earlier, when we have the pitch Zoom meetings, when we're workshopping ideas, it can kind of help direct someone with an angle as well. So if people have an idea, but they're not really sure what direction to go with it, we can kind of either implement or incorporate that guiding vision that we're working off of, and it can make it more centralized and basically just reiterating what Joy said, give them more of a clear idea.
Cool. And do you guys focus on Emerson artists exclusively, or do you cover events and artists around Boston?
In our print magazine, actually, we've started incorporating an Emerson Spotlight section, which is I've written the past two of them. And they're really fun to do because it gives us a chance to focus on more profile pieces and also cover artists who are up and coming within the Emerson community. And I think it's really cool to have that just because of our audience and position. But outside of that, we cover local music news in Boston and any independent up and coming artists. And that's what's amazing about the blog as well, because like Nick said, you definitely have more freedom, and we kind of just use our position as a small local magazine to really focus and bolster that local narrative.
In large part, it's been connected to the fact that if we write a piece about, you know, a humongous artist, a Taylor Swift, it's not going to pick up that much traction because we're such a small organization. But if we can reach out and get contact with, you know, local Boston artists and local Emerson artists as well, not only are they going to be interested and more willing to speak with us, but you know, people around us are going to be more interested in reading it as well.
Yeah, we're in a very unique situation location-wise, being at Emerson, being just down the street from Berkeley. And a lot of other small private schools around this area, or even some public schools that are bigger, have a very niche music community that's DIY and entirely DIY. And if you go to Emerson, you know about, you know, we don't really have a culture of partying in the dorms. We go to house shows in people's basements in Alston and Brighton and stuff. And that's like a huge part of my experience at Emerson. And I think that being able to share that, especially now that COVID's over and these DIY communities need our help, we need to be highlighting their work, their shows. I hope we get, you know, photographers out to their shows, and just hyping them up as much as we can. I know that one of the local house show kind of communities houses is back up and running. I hope they all come back. But yeah, I featured a piece during COVID on one of my former roommates who had done a documentary on Trendy Shit Town, which was one of the houses in Alston. That's up on the blog. And I think, yeah, highlighting local artists, but specifically DIY community local artists is incredibly important post-COVID.
So within the magazine and the writers, have you found that diversity happens organically, whether it's someone who's part of the LGBT community or another sort of minority, or has there had to be some efforts in order to diversify? Are you seeing a lack of people who are not like cis, straight, white coming out to either pitch articles or to join the board?
One thing that we really like to do and promote when the hiring process comes out is that we are open to everyone. Anyone who's a part of the Emerson community is welcome to apply, and we encourage them to apply. And one thing we really try to focus on is making sure that we're having a diverse staff. And I know moving forward, we're definitely going to try to implement some things to make sure that it's not going through one very narrow stream, because especially working on the editorial side of things, it can be really hard when you're trying to look for new ideas or add or kind of take things out, and it's only being viewed in one, like I said, a very narrow stream. So we're definitely trying to move forward and use our position as a big organization to ensure that we're having a diverse staff, and not only having a diverse staff, but also ensuring that the articles that we're pitching and publishing are covering a lot of different communities and giving the representation that's necessary.
And is there something that you would change going into next year about how the org operates, and or is there something from COVID that you would like to keep for next year?
Yeah, so kind of just going off of that same question, what we've been really trying to do this summer is I've been really focused on looking into building an anti-racist curriculum and working that within our staff, meaning that anyone who wants to write, design, take photos for our magazine, just work on 5 Cent Sound would be required to take part in this. It's not anything finalized yet because I've still been dabbling in and trying to find different things, but it probably would be like a meeting either once a month or every other week covering important topics. And one of the titles that seems really interesting that I've liked so far is called So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Ologu. And she is essentially a Nigerian American journalist who I really like the novel because it's broken down into very specific chapters, and it also has a discussion guideline in the back. So it would be really easy to kind of work in her thoughts from what she talked about in the novel and her reflection after writing it. And it would really help create some organic conversation. In the past from COVID as well, we had kind of like Zoom office hours where people could drop in with the exec board and kind of just voice any concerns that were on their mind, whether it's something that's happening within the organization, something we publish, and it's just really a good time to meet with the editorial staff and talk through things. And I think moving forward too, we're gonna also explore the option of creating an anonymous forum. So if people want to express some ideas or talk about or bring something up, but aren't really comfortable sharing their identity within that, they'll be able to still have their voices heard with that.
More along the lines of the, the active nature of the magazine than our anti-racist curriculum. But within COVID, especially for the blog, it seemed like we had way more opportunity to speak with artists that we would have never had the chance to speak with otherwise. I mean, the three of us sat and spoke with Phoebe Bridgers, which would have never happened, if it weren't for COVID. The one silver lining in, the whole last year and a half. But I really want to keep that going forward, especially for the blog, and it can be very useful for the magazine as well, because there are so many artists who are of the size that we could reach out to them and we could speak with them, and that I know, myself and all of our writers love to listen to. And now with COVID and the inclusion of Zoom and video conferencing, we really have an opportunity to do that on a more regular basis.
Yeah, I hope video conferencing never goes away. I think I'm the only person that thinks that, but I feel like at least for our meetings, we tend to meet pretty late at night, just to kind of appease everyone's schedules with classes and other extracurriculars. And so I don't know, for me at least, my first few years being here, having to meet at like 10 p.m. in the dorms was a bit tedious. So being able to jump on a Zoom call with 35 people right at my fingertips was much easier to consume. And I think that hopefully we can continue that to kind of help everyone streamline their schedules.
That's great. So now we're going to move on to topic 2, which is LGBT artists and producers. We're kind of moving away from the Emerson sphere and the role of 5 Cent Sound on campus, and moving into more just music news and things happening in the music industry. So who do you guys feel are the most prominent LGBT voices in the music industry currently?
One artist that I've been really into is Claude. I feel like they make really good music and they're a non-binary artist. And what I really like about their sound is they have a way of using audio and production to their advantage, meaning that when you listen to their newest album, Super Monster, and a lot of singles and tracks on that, you can hear that they have parts where their voice is very dreamy and soft, but then they also have different mixes where their voice kind of goes into a deep, lower range. And I really like that they're able to manipulate sound to their advantage. And they also work with Phoebe Bridgers, who we mentioned earlier. She actually runs Satisfactory Records, and they're signed under her. And Claude is also a part of the band Shelley, who works with Clairo, Josh Melling, I think his name is. And then there's somebody else, I think her name's Nora. So that's who I've really been into lately.
Yeah, I was going to add Clairo too, just to that, because Clairo went to school with Claude at Syracuse and they became friends. So Clairo is amazing. And I think that she's a very good voice in the community. I think she's awesome.
Okay, and do you guys feel that LGBT voices can be overshadowed by their straight allies? For example, Harry Styles and Taylor Swift. Harry Styles has not, and we can get into later about whether or not artists need to come out and identify as anything. But, you know, Harry Styles, for as far as we know, has not come out and said if they are part of the LGBT community. Taylor Swift, we know so far is straight, as far as we are aware, and yet people seem to look to them for any advice and stuff like that. So is that the vibe you guys are getting, or is it something different?
I think personally, the music industry as a whole is definitely catered towards and more accessible to straight cisgendered artists. It's very easy for them to have a platform and to use their voices just because it's the most accessible to them. And I believe that the most important thing is that they use their platforms to not only call attention to these issues, but also extend it to these other artists who might not have as much of an easy time breaking into the industry.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also think the Taylor Swift example is a good one. I know that her song, You Need to Calm Down, the donations to GLAAD went up a lot after that came out. I think it went up because her like lucky number is 13, so people were donating $13. However, she didn't actually ask for that to be done. It wasn't like she prompted people to be allies or to donate or to make an actual difference. She just put out a song with no context and no marketing towards that. So I think that you need to take it a step further if you're going to be a straight ally, and that is lacking in the music industry. It needs to be more of a directed effort.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. You know, you can't expect the movement to solely be based around LGBTQ people. You know, cisgender people and straight people need to take part, but their part needs to be in elevating these voices and raising awareness rather than in co-opting it for themselves or, you know, trying to turn it into their own thing.
Do you guys feel like there's pressure on artists who are out to sound a certain way or speak out on certain issues within the music industry, whether or not they feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think going back to Clairo, I was reading an article, I think it was in the Rolling Stone article for her new album Sling that just come out, but it's also been quoted in other articles. She was pretty hesitant to come out as bi because she wasn't sure how it would morph her status in the music industry in general, if that would be what she was labeled as and not considered more for her art, or rather if it would, you know, change her fan base, whatever it would do. She was, you know, concerned about how it could meld into her personal life and meld into her music. And the blurring the lines can be kind of obviously kind of scary for some people. So I think that she's a good example of somebody who did come out and had a positive experience with that, but that doesn't always happen. And so I definitely see how there's pressure there and how these artists are under every kind of scrutiny that's available. And so being a voice in the LGBT community is so important, but the pressure is immense.
And has the work of artists such as Lil Nas X changed the way the industry and or audiences view LGBT artists?
I would say absolutely. Lil Nas X is one of my favorite artists, you know, on the entire planet right now. And I love the fact that he is sort of unapologetically gay. And he doesn't care, you know, what we'll say about him. He's always just going to be himself. And he knows he has his loyal support and knows that there are plenty of people who hate him just because he's the person that he is. And yet he does things like, you know, constantly post on Twitter, both messing with these people and speaking out about who he is. And, you know, the Montero music video, you know, it seems like every time he does anything, you know, it hits the news for weeks and weeks and weeks, and everyone's focusing on it, where, you know, it's just him being himself and doing what he wants to do. Yet people can't stop talking about it.
Yeah, he's great. And I also think that specifically the BET specifically the BET Montero performance was specifically really good, because there's such a dichotomy or such a difference between what we accept from straight musicians who sing incredibly sexually explicit songs and have been for decades versus other musicians who are coming out now and have the same, same sex but same level of explicit content. I mean, all he did was kiss a man on stage, and that was enough to throw people over the edge, apparently. So I think keeping the boundaries, even just at being equal, he's doing so much just to even do that.
And the last question in this, I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit, Clara, but does a singer's sexual orientation or gender identity matter when they are creating their music? And do you feel the audiences deserve to know?
That's a really good and interesting question, because I feel like a lot of times music is rooted in a very personal experience, and it can be a very cathartic process. And artists are very often or used to kind of pulling from their own experiences. So it's definitely nice to have that sort of representation, especially within the music industry. But at the same time, I don't feel like audiences deserve to know, just because it should really be up to the artist's discretion on what they want to include and what they want to voice within their music. And it can also feel kind of limiting and also in a way degrading, knowing that they're just being kind of belittled or only I guess the right word is like valued for that type of orientation. Like I said, it is very important to have that representation, and I think it's extremely important for listeners to see that. But at the same time, I don't think artists should feel in any way pressured or feel like that's their only kind of attracting content or reason, because there's a lot of different elements that make an artist, and it's really important. But at the same time, it shouldn't be like that end all be all kind of thing.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to topic 3, which is disabled artists and producers. And we're including mental health and non-visible disabilities in this too. So is there a prominent example of disabled voices within the music industry?
The one person that speaks out to me when I hear that is Mike Posner. He began his career with, Cooler Than Me and all these pop songs that became humongous, but sort of after 2011, he fell off the face of the earth. A lot of that was rooted in depression, and a lot of that was rooted in mental health issues. And since then, and sort of coinciding with Avicii's passing, because he was very close friends with Avicii, he came back into the music scene and has done, so many incredible things and been such a positive voice, both to so many people and to myself. He's released 3 or 4 albums. He's released spoken word music. He's released an album that was sort of based around a 2-week period of his life where he sort of spiraled and he kind of left ambiguous whether or not that was actually true. But just being within himself about his own music and about everything he goes through, and not only using his music as a voice for that, but also doing things like he walked from the beach in New Jersey to the beach in California. And right now he's climbing Mount Everest for charity and raising money, and just constantly being a positive voice. So Mike Posner is someone that definitely speaks out to me.
Yeah, I think in general, there's so much to be said for the emo alternative community that we all grew up with, and how they were such like a solace for so many kids and so many teens who were struggling with their mental health. That's an aside. I'm going to go into somebody else, but just I need to give credit to that because that's such a huge community. Apart from that, we talked about Phoebe Bridgers before, and I don't know if she's ever explicitly said what her specific mental health struggles are or if she's diagnosed with anything, but just the representation she has in her music for depression and anxiety, and just kind of generalized disorders is incredible. I personally have OCD and some other mental health disabilities, and just the way that she outlines things so clearly and so plainly, and she isn't afraid to get into the nitty gritty of what it's like to have a disorder. I know in Graceland too, she mentions the line where they ask you in a hospital if you are a danger to yourself or others. And I had never heard that in a song before. And I was very taken aback when I first listened and very moved that she was honest enough. I know she wrote about her friend, but she was honest enough to like put in the stuff that isn't glamorous, put in the stuff that isn't, it isn't fun. It isn't pretty to sing about. And that makes the community feel so much more included and accepted.
And someone who comes to mind for me is Rick Allen, who was and still is the drummer for Def Leppard, which is basically just an English rock band, huge in the 70s and 80s. And he wasn't always dealing with a physical disability, but around, I think it was 1984, he got into a really bad car accident. And in that accident, he actually had to get his left arm removed. They tried to reattach it once he was in the hospital, but eventually I think it got infected, so it wasn't able to work. So he's left now playing the drums without a whole arm that he used. So he was kind of in this position of what to do, and he actually ended up getting a custom electric drum kit made for him. So he's still able to play, and instead of using his arm, I think it's like 4 electronic like foot taps he can use. So he's really been able to still keep his position within the band. And I think that's really important too, because it's a very big mainstream band that a lot of people know about. And he's kind of been able to, he's voiced in interviews as well that it's been a really learning process that he isn't I guess like regretful for. He's really liked kind of being able to adapt and learn more skills that he probably wouldn't have if that wouldn't have happened to him.
And so for the non-visible disabilities, should an artist feel obligated to come forward with that? Or even if they are visible, should an artist have to feel obligated to explain what has happened? Or what if they were born with it?
I think I'm definitely gonna go back to kind of a very similar answer to when we talked about the LGBT representation and coming forward with that part of your identity. I feel like it's very important to have that out there, but at the same time, if the artist isn't comfortable with sharing that and doesn't want that, I feel like they definitely should have the choice to not share that with the audience. And I think it's very hard within the music industry because as viewers, and the industry is built to have artists on a pedestal, and for there to be this expectation that everything has to be out there, that they no longer have a private life, and things can feel very public very fast. And again, I feel like it should really be up to the discretion of the artist to decide what they want to come forward with and what they want to share with their fans.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that and say it's kind of the same situation. And like I mentioned with Phoebe, like I don't think she's ever specifically said anything, but just having the representation in the lyrics and kind of insinuating things or implying something or being even general enough that it's applicable to people with any issue going on in their life is kind of enough. I think that there's representation needed, but I don't necessarily think that you have to force anybody to say something that they don't feel comfortable saying ever in any situation.
And are there any harmful stereotypes, tropes, common practices within the music industry towards either disabled artists or even disabled audience members?
One thing, this is kind of more of the journalism side that comes to mind when you ask this question. I feel like it can be very easy for disabled artists or artists within a certain marginalized community to be kind of labeled or grouped for that specific part of their identity. And I think it's really important for journalists when they're writing these stories to make sure if the artist is comfortable with that part of their identity being voiced in the article, that should be included. But at the same time, it should not be the whole point of the article or the whole angle in and of itself, because at the end of the day, an artist is an accumulation of things. And although those types and parts of their identity definitely play a certain role and importance into their music, it's not something that should be the focal point, because kind of looking at it oppositely, there's no like applauding or there's no angle that's focused for like able-bodied artists, for example. Like it's kind of just like that double standard. And I think it's really important, knowing the position we have, to make sure that we're not just focusing and kind of making that the one big point that's the center of attention for an article.
And do you guys feel that competition shows such as The Voice, America's Got Talent, and American Idol use stories that involve traumatic past and disabilities for views more than to bring awareness to those issues that might arise?
Yes. Absolutely. I actually know someone personally who auditioned for, I think it was The Voice a long time ago. And they had recently experienced a death either in their family or a friend had died, and that was all the producers wanted to harp on. That was their entire story. That's who they made them out to be. And I don't know how far they got, but I think they got far enough that it was evident that that was all they wanted to do in interviews, was talk about that. And the same goes for disabilities. It's hyped up. It becomes their entire personality. It's their only character trait. And it's really sad to see when people are genuinely very talented and it becomes all consuming for the audience to kind of connect with them that way when there are so many other ways to connect with them as a person.
It almost feels like the producers, no matter who comes forward, are searching for that, because they know that that's that story and that's what's going to make people watch and make people pay attention. When, you know, the idea of something, I mean, the show's called America's Got Talent. Like, it should be focused on the talent. It should be focused on, you know, how incredible these artists, comedians, performers are, not what their story is and what kind of, you know, thing you can pull from their life and focus on.
And kind of building off of that too, when there's a focus on storylines and it's rooted in that searching, it definitely plays into the inspiration trope that exists. And that's really harmful, because then it's giving the certain applauding without actually combating or confronting the issues that are ingrained in these systems. And if you're not doing that, then you're missing the whole point, in my opinion.
And my last question for this topic is there something let me rephrase that, someone who knows very little about the music industry, is there something they should be aware of in regards to people with disabilities in the industry, how they're treated, how they're marketed? Is there anything we missed that you would like to specifically focus on right now?
I know that I think the music industry mimics trends, right? It mimics what's popular. It mimics like socially and culturally where we are. And so I think in terms of mental health, as I mentioned before, at least in this country, I know that things are getting kind of better, where we're more open with talking about, you know, how a lot of people are depressed and a lot of people are anxious, especially with COVID. Coming out of that, you know, therapy has gone up and people are more open talking about that they go to therapy. And so seeing that represented in artists is probably more socially acceptable. I don't think I could name you anybody on the top 40 right now who I know, at least, it has like a visible disability. And that's a huge problem. So I think that it mimics kind of where we're at as a pulse socially, and we're accepting, you know, one thing maybe more than another. So yeah.
Definitely a lot of work to do. I think a big thing is that everyone views themselves, and whether it be mental or physical, but everyone's going to view their disabilities in a way that is different than everyone else who's perceiving it. So, you know, focusing and trying to mold these artists into something that they don't feel they are is a really harmful strategy, and really hurts a lot of artists and the perception of a lot of things, you know, from depression to physical disabilities. I think it's really dangerous for the music industry.
That was a great conclusion to that topic. And I would like to move on to topic 4, which is the audience-artist relationship, or audience-listener relationship, depending on where they are. And first and foremost, I think it's top of most people's minds always. Should artists be held accountable for the actions of their fan base? Do you think they have any responsibility over what fans either say towards each other, like fans to other fans of the same artist, or even a fan base attacking another fan base of a different artist just because that artist has expressed discontentment with that other artist?
I think with being an artist, especially one who has a lot of power in the music industry, there is definitely a responsibility, because you have a huge platform and it is your job. So it really comes with what you're promoting as an artist and the values that you're putting out there. For example, one of Harry Styles's slogans is "treat people with kindness." So I think really there is a big importance and honestly a responsibility in ensuring that as an artist, you're putting the right messages forward for your community and you're setting those boundaries. Obviously, with artists that big, they're not going to be able to monitor every single little detail in fan bases. But at the same time, I think it's definitely necessary and important for artists to address that behavior, because if they don't, it's honestly, like I said, it's just not responsible, and it breeds that toxic behavior, and it creates unsafe spaces, which is, in my opinion, the whole point of music. Like, I go to it for comfort and I go for relation. And when you're having fans get away with this stuff and you're not calling it out, it creates a really unsafe space, and it's just not okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I think that under certain situations, maybe it could be excusable to have the artist be maybe separated from the fan base a little bit. I always think that you cannot separate the art from the artist, though. I will stand by that. However, I think that if the artist isn't necessarily perpetuating the ideas themselves, if they're not telling the fans to attack this person, or the attack was a bit more frivolous than the fans are taking it, or they tell the fan base to stop, or they kind of intervene, or they, don't, like, it's not being weaponized in their actual music. If there's a genuine disconnect between the movement the fans are creating and what the morals and values of the artist are, and if they've tried to intervene and that won't stop it, I don't think you can necessarily blame the artist. But if they're promoting that culture and they're, saying, hey, attack this person, or they're adding them on Twitter, or it's like a very specific personal issue, then yeah, there's definitely some blame to take and some responsibility. I think that all people who are artists in any capacity should be aware that they have a big say over fan bases, and they, like, that power can't be abused.
Going off of that, just kind of a follow-up question. Do you think some of these big artists are doing enough, are not doing enough? Do you think some of them are just oblivious to their fan bases? Now, this is not to say these artists have done anything wrong, but the biggest fan bases I'm aware of are Taylor Swift, Harry Styles, Nicki Minaj, and most of these pop artists, Ariana Grande. And do you think sometimes there's like these arguments where they almost feel oblivious to what their fan base is saying and not doing enough? And if so, can you think of a specific example?
Yeah, I'm struggling to think of a specific example. I know, I'm just thinking this isn't even about like a fan base, but I know, and I used to be a huge Taylor Swift fan. I still love her, but she has her faults, and I'll point her out. When Ginny and Georgia, I think the show came out, she tweeted directly at them and was like, hey, you're making fun of me and that hurts my feelings, but said in a very passive aggressive, weirdly worded way. And I'm not quite sure if the fans went after the show, but I can only assume they did. And in that, you kind of have to leverage your power because, she obviously had more power than a show that was new on Netflix. She knew that her fans were going to get angry and back her up. And these are just young actresses and writers and people who worked really hard to just make a joke that probably wasn't that horrible. So I think that in that capacity, yeah, she can kind of be a little aggressive sometimes. And I'm sure there are other artists. But others might not be aware of what they're doing or what the fans are doing specifically, because I think, especially if you're an older artist, I know like Ariana Grande is married. Like, I don't know if she spends her days like scrolling through Twitter looking for what her young fans are talking about. So I'm not sure in that, how invested they are in what the fans talk about.
And kind of veering away from fan bases and just on general audience questions, can you guys think of accommodations that disabled individuals can receive at concerts and live venues? And if you have suggestions for accommodations that aren't in place everywhere yet.
Yeah, I think a lot of, at least places that I've been, and I've been to pretty much every major venue in the Massachusetts, like New England area, they're just not like physical disability accommodating in any way. I mean, there are some sections for people who may be in a wheelchair at some like level, but they're never like by the stage. They're never with a good view. They're always sectioned off from other seats. It's always like very small. They don't sell a lot of tickets for those sections. We probably have to fight people to get those tickets, knowing how hard it is to get general admission to shows. And I will specifically call out Paradise Rock Club, and I hope I don't get people mad at me if I do, but I've been there many times, and I never, like, until I saw this question, I'd never thought about the fact that I had never seen anyone in a wheelchair or with any physical disability that like handicapped them not able to get to the front of a venue or to be in the venue. I'd never seen anybody at this venue. It's a very small venue. And there's like a downstairs in GA, and then there's an upstairs where you can have a better view. Cause I mean, I'm short, I can't see much on the floor. So I always go to the top. but I looked it up and the top doesn't have an elevator, or at least wasn't advertised as having an elevator, and I've never seen an elevator. So that's something that should be thought of. They said that there was like a wheelchair accessible spot on stage left, but it's all pit seats. So you're like pushed up against the barricade. I don't know how anybody would be able to see from there, or not be pushed around and, you know, kind of thrown into the mix. So I think that prioritizing that in like small venues and older venues is very important, because they're not modified, they're not up to code. And I know that under the ADA they have to be, but it's not up to like a code where it can accommodate more than one person.
So let's veer off to a totally different demographic that's probably been the undercurrent of all of our conversations but never explicitly mentioned. That would be teenage girls. I mean, literally, let's just like talk about the power of teenage girls for a hot sec. So artists who are popular right now, that would be Taylor Swift, as we mentioned, Harry Styles, Nicki Minaj, Ariana Grande, right now rising to the top, Olivia Rodrigo, Conan Gray, Troye Sivan. All of these people have one thing in common, and that's their fan base. So you guys want to talk about that trend, talk about how it's been pretty consistent in the music industry.
Yeah, teenage girls, like we said, have so much power. They can just dictate a whole career. They say what's in. I've seen people on Twitter work to break certain, like get certain tops on songs on the top 40. Like, it's crazy the power they can galvanize. And I think it's interesting too when it comes to concerts as well, because they're able to, within like a certain groups online or even through Twitter, make like these huge fan projects that go and extend through like thousands of shows. And it's like, I just remember pre-COVID, like looking into audiences and just seeing the way that they're able to orchestrate certain themes and visuals and just be like, whoa, like there's no real communication, but like there is this type of community and online presence that they have that is really powerful. And I think it's really important and interesting to look into the ways that they can, like I said, build support for their artists in certain songs. And also like, they're just very good at dictating trends as well. So it's like, if I'm ever, when I feel out of touch, like I'll go to Twitter and I'll look at teenage girls and be like, okay, what should I be listening to? Like, what should I be doing? Because they have a lot of power and they're underestimated and not always kind of given the credit they deserve, which is unfortunate.
Really off the point of them being underestimated and sort of within and outside of the realm of music, like it was K-pop stans that totally like changed the course of a Trump rally throughout the most recent election. You know, he was on social media boasting about how he was going to have the biggest audience and how everyone was coming up to show and support him. And, you know, because K-pop stans got all those tickets and reserved all those tickets and nobody showed, it ended up being a complete joke. And he looked like, you know, a total idiot. And that power is, it's honestly something I wasn't aware of until very recently, but it is so strong, and the power that they have in numbers is incredible.
Yeah, as a former teenage girl, being a teenage girl was so special in my life. I like wish I could live in 17 forever. I was so upset to like turn 20, and now I'm 21, but I was so sad to like my 19 summer. It's a big deal. But no, teenage girls are amazing. They're magic. They're so powerful and they're so strong and they're so like it's like the beautiful reckless emotions that you go through when you're a teenager, and they tap into it so well, and they're on the pulse of everything. If you ever need to check the pulse, like Ashley said, check Twitter, check anything teenage girls are on. And my favorite thing about being a former teenage girl is I was a huge Backstreet Boy fan as a kid. And my first concert was the Backstreet Boys when I was 9. But I kind of missed the boat by 10 years. So everyone else there was 30 and drunk. But it was so beautiful to see these like now moms who look like they were still teenage girls and were just as happy and with their friends, and had like this band had lasted for 20 years because of them. It never went away. And I think that love that you have when you're young and you are like fascinated with an artist is so special, and they get you through so much just being in your life. And that's the power of teenage girls, the stay power, the last power.
I actually just thought of something specific because I know the first band that can really be pinpointed as, you know, having a mostly teenage girl fan base and like skyrocketing to fame would be the Beatles. And then from then on, it's a lot of boy bands and individuals. But do you think just You mentioned the Backstreet Boys. There was One Direction recently, and there's other boy bands from the 80s and 90s that I don't remember. But do you think they seem to gravitate towards or individuals, or is it just whatever they like the sound of? And what's the stigma behind, an artist or a band having a mostly teenage girl fan base?
I think there's a lot of instances where they're sort of produced with that in mind, where like producers and managers know that there are so many teenage girls that are going to cling to an artist that they're basically fishing for it. But in everything I've seen, it seems like the artists who actually get there are the ones who actually have what people are seeking out, and not the ones who are produced or managed to be that way.
Well, the stigma is that it's not good music, and it is. I think that's the stigma. The stigma is that they're not talented and that they're, fluff, and that they are pop, and pop gets written off as whatever. But I think if you look a little bit deeper into the connections past, the boy band, past whatever, and you look into the essence of the music they're making, and especially artists like Lorde or Taylor Swift, or artists that are like true lyricists, and young women look up to them. Looking into that, I think, kind of reveals that there is a lot of depth, and there is a lot of intellectual stuff going on when these girls attach to artists.
The last question in this topic kind of focuses on you guys as an audience member rather than just the general vague people. And it's the music that you are most interested in listening to and or performing now. Is that the same music you grew up with, either as a child or as a teenager, or has it evolved over time?
I just listen to music. I always say this, there's a reason why I write about music and not make it. I could never do it. I have so much respect and admiration for anyone who can pick up an instrument or sing, because that's not me. But I think there's definitely yes and no. There are certain songs that I can always go back to. And for me, music is a very personal association-based thing. So there are always going to be certain artists or songs that I associate with certain people and moments in my life. And I think as the years have gone on, I have definitely still have been able to been rooted in that. And also like what I've listened to when I was younger definitely fueled my love for music and kind of got me into more influences. But at the same time, there's definitely things that I cringe at that I look at. And I think that also a big thing about music for me too is it's honestly very overwhelming, just because there's so much out there. So it's like I always feel this constant push, and I'm always trying to get myself to listen to different things. But at the same time, I'm a very like mood dictated person when it comes to listening to music. So there are just times in my life where I'm like, I can't I can't process new things. Like I just need to regress and I need to go back to it. So it really just depends on what I'm feeling.
Yeah, I would say the same. For me, it's more about lyrics. I think, and all of us are writers, three of us are writers. And so for me, it's always been about like, are the lyrics good? I don't care what kind of music it is. I don't care what genre. I don't care what the melody is or who's making it. If the lyrics are good, I will listen to it and I will support it. But in terms of growing up and changing, I think my parents played a lot of James Taylor. That was the first date was at a James Taylor concert. A lot of like folk singer-songwriter kind of stuff. And that kind of tends to be what I like too. I was like super into Casey Musgraves when she came out with her first album in 2013. And I made my dad take me to a free show on the Common in like 2015 to see her. And he's like, this is really good. And he like has Phoebe's albums. So I feel like that's the cool thing about growing up is that if you are informed by what your parents listen to or by whoever that raised you, what they listened to and they shared with you, like sharing with them what you find and then kind of melding the two. That's the fun part.
I think a huge part of it is, the quantity of music. There's so many songs and so many artists and so many sounds, like my mom's favorite artist is Billy Joel. And to this day, I will listen to Billy Joel, nonstop. I always love his music. But, there are artists that I listen to that if I showed my parents, like if I listened to the new Glass Animals album with my parents, they'd be really confused. They'd be like, what is this? It's such a both a nostalgic and a universal and a personal thing that the power of music and the impact of music is sort of unquantifiable.
What a great way to leave. Thank you guys so much for coming and speaking on these issues. It was very insightful, and I will see everyone later.
Thank you so much for extending this opportunity to us. It was so nice to have this conversation and meet with you. And we're super excited for what's going to come the fall semester because there's a lot of new faces coming in and there's a lot of changing within the organization and there's a lot of old faces here too. So I think there's going to be a really good mix of, especially with a lot of stuff opening with restrictions from COVID loosening. I'm really excited to see what's on the horizon for all of us.
That was wonderful. And I think also with like the COVID restrictions loosening, maybe you'll see people you weren't able to see last year too.
Really hoping to have things in
That's all
person.
for us.
Yeah, at least once. At least one in person.
Once. Well, thank you guys so much for coming out, and I hope you guys have a good night.